Hello, I am Shari Foos, founder of the Narrative Method. And today we have a special edition of TNM Talks with an incredible writer and thinker, Julia Hotz. She is a journalist reporting on what's working to help people live more joyful, meaningful, and connected lives. Right up our alley. Her new book, The Connection Cure, The Prescriptive Power of Movement, Nature, Art, Service, and Belonging, is coming out on Simon & Schuster. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much, Sherry. It's so great to be here. And yes, totally agreed. A lot of things up our mutual alley, I would say.
Exactly. I wish I could upload your brain and really look at all the research that gave you such a full understanding of all this stuff. But let me ask you some questions. You talk about how we humans are not evolutionarily wired for this crazy cult of culture. Talk about that.
That's right. That's right. I mean, look, if we had to trade our life today between life 10,000 years ago, I'd probably pick today. But I think if we think about how humans evolve, number one, we evolved to live in groups,
Mhm.
but also the actual activities that made up our lives and that we depended on for survival. Much of that is missing from our daily lives. So, for example, in order to survive, we had to move our bodies. We had to walk and climb trees and carry things to move food and hunt for food and find shelter. We had to be able to pay attention to nature, right? What sort of food sources exist around us in the trees and the rivers. We evolved to tell stories with one another in order to make survival a bit easier. We evolved to serve one another, to live in sort of mutual aid, right? With this idea that the crowd is better than the individual. And we evolved also to make life worth living, to cultivate a sense of belonging, to feel like these ups and downs are not ours to shoulder alone. And that's why in the earliest civilizations, we have celebrations and funerals and very, sort of culturally super important ceremonies to cultivate that sense of belonging.
So true. And first of all, stories are what connect us. Without a story, what are we? Who are we?
Right,
But
right.
what I'm really loving about your work is the appreciation of what social connection means, and we can't live without it. We
That's right.
absolutely struggle. So I know that healthcare companies are really getting on board with this and prescribing social connection. Talk about what you've learned in that.
Yeah, that's right. Social connection is one of the many elements that comes with this new subject of my book, social prescribing. The book is called The Connection Cure. It came out this week. And what social prescribing really gets to is this idea that there are social determinants of health. Our health is determined by these factors in our environment, right? Do we have enough food to eat? Do we struggle with making ends meet? Do we have a reason to wake up in the morning?
Exactly.
One element of that is our social connection, right? Some great data from the Harvard Adult Development Study shows that the strength of human relationships are the number one predictor of our health and longevity later in life. And so, one aim of social prescribing and treating these social determinants of health is to activities that can promote meaningful human connection. So, yes, they're literally prescribing writing workshops, art classes, nature walks, cycling groups, whatever exists in the community that matters to the patient. And what I love and really think is aligned with narrative method here is that social prescribing is about shifting from what's the matter with the patient to
Exactly.
what matters to the patient. Yeah,
I love that. And also, switching from what's the matter with the patient to what is the cultural impact on
right.
not just the individual, but on all
That's
of
right.
us. So, one of the reasons I love doing group work is because when people feel safe enough to be vulnerable, what you always see is that if someone says, I'm a procrastinator, or I've got this fear or this anxiety, inevitably other people will shake their heads. And
Yeah.
it's an aha moment. You mean it's not just me?
Yeah.
We're so overly shamed for not fitting. Nobody fits in. Who fits in properly to this craziness? But because we're so shamed, we're not so eager to reveal that until we start to see we're not alone. And
Mhm.
that support of not being alone is 50% of really getting better.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that support through both the lows and the highs, you know?
Exactly.
What I loved about some of the stories this book tells is people have said things like, everywhere I went, I was just a trauma story. My doctor or my therapist would look at me and really only see me for my
Mm,
trauma and my symptoms. But I come to these groups where, yes, we can assume that some other people are struggling in the same way, but we're also united because of the thing that matters to us, right? We're united because we're all here making music or, painting or going bird watching, whatever it might be. And that too is also, I think, a reprieve from the isolation that comes with feeling like you are alone and the only
yeah.
person who's struggled.
So you're such a deep person. You are obviously contemplative and introspective and warm. And I'm curious, what was it about your life and your experience that
Mm.
drew you to this passionate subject?
It's a great question. And, you know, I don't know if you felt this way with the narrative method, but sometimes you realize why you're doing the thing while you're doing it. And
Sure.
for a long time, I sort of had the professional answer that I'm a journalist. I report on solutions. I report on what communities are doing to solve problems. And healthcare isn't working for a lot of people. This seems like a cool new approach. But of course, in the course of writing it and meeting with so many people who shared their life stories, detailed, like I said, the depths of what was the matter with them, but also what mattered to them and how these activities and social prescriptions were so healing, I started to see myself in that story. I'm 31 and I'm feeling the changes in my environment in my life right now. And what's been such a great medicine for me is to join some of my local groups out here, whether it's mutual aid, whether it's community gardening, whether it's bird watching, whether it's tomorrow morning, for example, in my park, they're doing a free painting session.
Oh,
These,
great.
yeah, so these little bits of community medicine in our community, I've found to be so healing for my own loneliness and battles with anxiety and sadness and frustrations. It's really been life changing, actually.
And I think now that it's named loneliness, it's
Right.
not so shameful. Before, it was like, I'm not going to tell you I'm lonely. I'm not
Yeah.
going to tell you I'm hard up, but as we understand that in addition to the impact of our growing up, our parents, our siblings, the community, criminal justice system, all of those impacts, those are one piece. The
Right.
culture impacts everyone. It impacts your parents. It impacts everyone who is alive in Western culture.
Yeah.
And because of that, we all struggle with these crazy feelings that there's something wrong with us,
Yeah.
something wrong with the culture. And I so
Absolutely.
deeply appreciate, it's also the wonder with which you describe this stuff, like the wonder, wow, I'm going to paint. You don't have
Yeah.
to be an artist to paint. You don't have to
Right.
be a writer to write, but
Right.
to be human and to discover these parts. And I love how you articulate your work. So, how did you become a journalist?
Well, I just want to say about that, I think you're so right. And I so appreciate what you're trying to do, right? I mean, we know that loneliness is at epidemic levels. It's actually Loneliness Awareness Week as we're recording this podcast. And
Yeah,
um, that is alarming on one hand, but it's also comforting in the sense that we're not
exactly.
alone in our loneliness. And what makes me so excited is that this is a solution that doesn't kick it back to the individual to say, you need to try harder. You need
Right,
to
right.
be doing more or doing something differently. It's acknowledging the fact that our culture is broken and that we need solutions within that culture in order to treat this epidemic. And so I
Yes.
became a journalist, yeah, through that curiosity. I became a
Mhm.
journalist in 2018, really. This was the year that the UK had established a minister of loneliness. I
Yeah.
thought this was super interesting. And I was curious, like, what is this minister actually going to do? And so I talked to people who had identified as lonely. There's like a clinical scale for it and everything. And it was they who really pointed me to social prescribing.
Mm,
And so I've been reporting on different forms of social prescribing for 6 years now, and it's been just to your point about wonder, the most, like, wonderful, reporting journey I could be on. Every day I get to meet people who are either leading this work or benefiting from this work, and often both. Often
yeah.
people who receive a social prescription go on to then bring others in.
And it's also, once we name it, once we can say what it is, we're better apt to be able to articulate what we feel, to be able to express what we feel. And in being seen for
Yeah.
these feelings, we feel whole just to
Yeah.
be seen. It's so powerful.
I couldn't
Wow.
agree
So,
more.
okay, what's next? Your book came out a second ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's next is to try to help this movement grow as much as possible. I'm not someone who I think necessarily wants to write a lot of books or be an author, but I wanted to write this book because I think the time is really now for us to mobilize around social prescribing. And
Yeah.
for our listeners in the US, they might be interested to know that there is a group called Social Prescribing USA that's trying to get these kinds of social prescriptions into every American's healthcare system by 2035. And so I would love to keep talking to people like you, keep talking to people who
Absolutely.
are raising awareness of the power that this kind of work can have.
Yeah, well, I hope we can do it a little sooner because there's a lot of people that are lonely today, and every single day has an impact, much less 11 years.
That's right.
Um,
That's
so
right.
I want to work with you. I want to continue to connect with you, and I hope you'll come to our salons because it's rare that we find someone whose voice is right in the pocket. And I love where you're coming from with this, and I love what you're offering to others.
Thank you so much. I mean, likewise for you. You have been facilitating a form of social prescribing even before maybe you'd heard of that word. So
Yeah.
thank you for aiding this movement without realizing it.
Well, thank you. When we started the narrative method 12 years ago and talked about empathy, nobody seemed to be interested. So it's
Wow.
interesting too how sometimes revolutions, big and small, that may have short-term pain, really open the door. And when people in the pandemic started to realize what was already happening, and
Yeah,
now we could no longer deny it.
that's right. That's
It's
right.
been really important, especially in the last few years as we've come out of it. And like, now what? How
Right.
should we be? How can we connect? And instead of focusing connection on dating and relationships, it's such a narrow group of people that are
Right.
really in that pocket. Connecting with someone, regardless of what your relationship is healing and beautiful and really a growth experience. So,
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Julia, I'm loving you. I really hope we can stay connected and that you'll come back and share again with our group.
Likewise, Sherry, thank you so much. Thank you to the narrative method and to everyone listening for participating in this work
Lots of love. See you next time.
too. Take care.